Camera speed.
Sound production, take one.
Action!
Welcome to From Beneath the Hollywood Sign. If you love old movies, Hollywood history, or the golden age of filmmaking, you've come to the right place. This is the podcast that talks about amazing stories of Tinseltown from another era. Hear fascinating conversations with writer-producer Steve Cubine, who quite literally lives just beneath the Hollywood sign, and actress-writer Nan McNamara. Now your hosts, Steve and Nan.
Steve, Lindsay, and I are celebrating a big anniversary this year.
Oh, congratulations.
Yeah, we're celebrating 20 years.
Wow.
It just went by in a heartbeat.
That's amazing.
Yeah, or as a friend of ours says, when he said that he was married for 35 years, we said, did it seem like you'd been married a long time? And he said, like 35 minutes underwater.
Oh.
So that's a way to segue into our topic, because we're going to be talking about couples that were married that they didn't quite make it to 20, and some of them didn't even make it to 5.
Well, sometimes Cupid gets it right, but sometimes Cupid gets it wrong.
Yes.
And let's talk about those. They're kind of sometimes more interesting to talk about.
Yes. Our first couple is Betty Grable and Jackie Coogan.
Who would have ever thought those two people would be together?
No, I would not have matched them up.
I know. It's funny because I don't think most people even know who Jackie Coogan is. Maybe a few people from our generation will remember him from The Addams Family, where he played Uncle Fester.
Yes. And he is, if you're a lover of film, you know him from The Coogan Law, which plays into his story with Betty Grable.
It absolutely does. And thank God for him, because he really did change laws to protect child actors so that their greedy parents didn't spend all their money, which is kind of what happened to him.
So how did he meet Betty Grable?
They met at Catalina off the coast of Los Angeles. Coogan was there on a little vacation, and he was introduced to this young, pretty actress named Betty Grable.
And Coogan had already made a number of movies.
He was already a kid star, and he was, at this point, I think he's in his late teens almost. I don't think he's quite 20. Mm-hmm. And, she's around the same age. And Grable had been a chorus girl. She had just gotten under contract at Paramount Pictures, which was a big break for her. So she wasn't quite the pinup girl that we know today. Sure. She was this up-and-coming young actress. There was an immediate spark and attraction, and soon they're in this big romance. They're photographed all over town at every swanky nightclub and restaurant you can imagine. And during that time, since, she was just starting out and he was this well-established, wealthy actor,
right,
people kind of wondered if maybe she was a gold digger, that she was after his money.
Right. Because he's not Clark Gable.
If you remember him as a kid, just imagine him looking kind of the same, but maybe 19 or 20.
Right. So that's why rumors were started.
Yes. They were really hot and heavy, and I think they truly cared for each other, although probably not the most perfect match in the world. But their mothers were vehemently against them being together.
Both mothers.
Both mothers were like not having any part of this. And they knew that they were inching closer and closer to marriage. So Betty Grable's mother begged her to at least wait until she's 21 to marry. Well, it just didn't happen. I think they got married on November the 20th, 1937, a month shy of her 21st birthday.
Okay.
So love was too much. She had to marry her man.
And as her star is beginning to rise, the studio is happy to capitalize, right, on their marriage.
Oh, yes. A great PR, I think, event for the studios.
Sure. So they were in a couple of movies together.
They did. The powers that be put them together in College Swing in 1938 and then $1 Million Legs in 1939, which is where she's starting to capitalize on the figure, the legs, the whole image.
Sure, that we know so well now.
Yeah.
So Jackie is waiting to receive the fortune that he made as a young actor from his mother and stepfather. They had been handling his financial affairs.
Yes.
So while he's waiting for that money to come, which I'm assuming was an age thing, they're living off the money that Betty made at Paramount.
Yes, at Paramount.
Much to her dismay.
Yes. Here he is, this wealthy actor, and they're having to live off her very modest contract fee of maybe $100 a week.
Right.
Which was still back then was more than that.
Right.
So finally, Betty Grable urges Coogan, go to your parents, get access to your money so we can live and start our life together. Well, Coogan went to his parents and they refused to give him access to his own money. So he ended up having to take them to court just to get access to it.
His own parents.
His own parents, his mom and stepdad.
Right.
Well, of course, he was convinced that the court would rule in his favor. He would soon get access to his money.
Sure.
He'd have his money. They could start their life. It would be a beautiful thing. Well, the big shocker was when it did go to court and all the accounts were revealed in court, he had no money.
Oh, his parents, his stepfather and his mother.
They had blown through his millions of dollars and they spent it on diamonds and furs and fancy cars. And they lived like kings. And he had nothing left because nobody was there to protect him.
Which is why the Coogan law exists today to protect child actors from relatives or people that say they're taking care of them from stealing their money.
Yes. And I think that this revelation that he had no money definitely put a strain on their relationship.
I'm sure it did.
And ultimately, it was the unraveling of the two of them. I think Betty Grable got tired of footing the bill, and they eventually divorced in 1939.
So they get divorced. Betty goes on to an infamous on-again, off-again relationship with George Raft, and she later marries the band leader, Harry James. Jackie would marry 3 more times to 3 young starlets.
He had a type.
But Betty and Jackie remained friends.
They did, in spite of it all. In spite of being the most unlikely couple ever, they stayed friends.
Let's move on to Greer Garson and Richard Ney.
Oh, this is a good one.
Yes, it is. It is.
Of course, Greer Garson, everybody knows. She was discovered by Louis B. Mayer when she was on stage in Europe. He found her. He brought her to America. He built her into one of the most popular film actresses we had during the 40s. And this all led up to the making of the film Mrs. Miniver, which, of course, she won the Oscar for.
1942.
1942. But not only did she win the Oscar for Mrs. Miniver, she got something else off of that set, too. She found love in the form of one of her castmates. In fact, it was Richard Ney who played her son.
Her son, who is only 12 years younger than her. Let's just say that now.
Even that's interesting, that they would cast somebody, the age gap would be so small playing mother and son.
Right. I think of Angela Lansbury in Manchurian Candidate. But 12 years is not that much of a difference. But I think during this time period...
As they started to date, Louis B. Mayer, who of course she was under contract to, he hated this relationship.
Okay.
He knew that it was going to give his golden goose bad publicity.
Right.
And it did.
And it did.
The public really did not take a shining to this older woman dating this young actor who played her son in a movie.
Yeah, I still think the public does not like women going out with younger men. And it's wrong. I mean,
it's wrong.
It's wrong that
It is.
people feel that way. But
It absolutely is. They were in love. Greer was determined to marry him, and she did. So July 24th, 1943, they tie the knot. Right after that, Ney joined the Navy and was shipped overseas.
okay.
Which really changed everything. Greer regained her popularity. She went on to great movie after great movie, was still a number one, or was still a very popular actress at MGM.
Right.
But Ney ended up returning from the service, and he wasn't able to restart his career.
Okay.
Which was the beginning of the problem because he grew very resentful of Greer's fame and her money, her popularity. And it was not a good thing.
Yeah, so his insecurity got in the way. And in an attempt to save the marriage, Greer takes a year off from acting.
I think that's very admirable.
pretty generous.
That she wanted to make it work so badly that she left her career for a year.
Right.
But you know, it still didn't work.
Yeah, it still didn't work. And he didn't get along with her mother who was living with them.
Yes. Apparently, Greer Garson was very attached, almost codependent on her mother.
Okay.
As a lot of Hollywood actresses were in those days.
Yeah.
You think Ginger Rogers or so many of them.
Right.
But yes, she lived with them, which could not be healthy for a young newlywed couple.
Sure. So after 4 years of marriage, they now go through a very nasty public
nasty divorce.
Okay.
He was so harsh to her during the marriage. I mean, and Greer Garson had to testify in court about this. I mean, she told the court that he was emotionally abusive. He would call her a has-been. He would make fun of her age. I mean, it was really harsh the way he treated her.
And he really didn't have much of a career after that.
No, he really didn't. But I find it funny that after the divorce, Greer ended up getting the last laugh because MGM decided to make a sequel to the wildly popular and profitable Mrs. Miniver. They called it The Miniver Story, 1950. Well, Nay's character was cut out. Wonder if Greer had anything to do with that.
I wonder.
So don't mess with Greer.
All right, our next couple. This is quite a powerhouse couple. Rita Hayworth and Orson Welles.
Again, one of the most unlikely couplings in Hollywood.
Yeah, although both such huge stars, but yes.
Yes. Who would
Can't
have
see that working.
Ever. It was so big and oafish, and she was Rita Hayworth.
Yes, she was Rita Hayworth. Yes.
But you know what? I guess it wasn't all about looks.
No, it wasn't. But they did come from two very different backgrounds, right?
Yes.
I didn't realize that he was raised in Wisconsin by a wealthy family.
Yeah,
right?
yeah. He came from a really nice stock of family in the Midwest. But his mother was very doting. I mean, she's the one who really created this whole boy genius image for him.
Mothers and sons.
And mothers and sons. We should do a whole episode on that.
Yes, we could.
But I think she gave him that self-confidence where, he was able to go on and reach such heights in the film industry.
And Rita came from just such a tragic background.
She had a really rough
Upbringing.
background. Her father was a dancer and made Rita his partner and was abusive, I think emotionally, I think sexually. It really was an unhealthy relationship. And all her father did was, pardon the expression, but hoard her out because he wanted to make a star out of her to bring in money.
Okay.
It was all about the money, and he saw her as a commodity and what he could make off of her, which is horrible.
Yeah.
And I think it had a lot to do with how Rita viewed men and her relationships with men her entire life.
Sure. Well, Orson Welles, as we all know, in his 20s, he's already made a name for himself with the Mercury Theater.
Yes.
And Citizen Kane. And
he scared the hell out of America with the War of the Worlds radio broadcast where people thought that aliens were attacking New Jersey.
Yeah. And he surrounded himself with some of the most amazing artists of the time. Joseph Cotton, Geraldine Fitzgerald, Agnes Moorehead, Norman Lloyd, who we've talked about before.
Vincent Price and John Houseman. I mean, the Mercury players, I mean, they were just the top of the top, upper echelon of the acting world.
So you have these two forces in these two people. You've got Orson, who's got this confidence and this swagger, and you've got Rita, who's insecure, and they come together because Orson Welles first saw Rita in Life magazine. Is that right?
He did. He saw the famous photo in Life of her in the black negligee on the bed, and he just fell in love with her. And
he
said,
fell in love with the photo.
I want to meet that girl. So he kept, just bombarding her with requests for dinner. Have dinner with me, have dinner with me. She would always politely decline, and he finally wore her down.
Okay.
And she agreed to dinner.
And they fell in love.
Yeah, they fell in love. And by this time, Rita is now under contract with Columbia Studios.
Okay.
And Harry Cohn is making a big star out of her. Even though she just had no self-confidence, she had no belief in herself, but she was on the brink of becoming a major, major star.
So they get married and they actually have a child together.
They do, a baby girl named Rebecca.
So they're settling into a kind of a home life, but one of them is never home.
Exactly. On paper, it was kind of exciting. They're both big stars.
Sure.
They get together, they marry, they're playing house. But I think part of the problem was that Rita Hayworth was very emotionally needy, and he was not. And that really turned him off, and it really pushed him away, her emotional neediness.
And he was so focused on the films that he was creating and completely driven to create the next Citizen Kane.
The next big thing. Throughout their marriage, there was rumors that he cheated on her constantly, which finally she'd had enough. I mean, she left him once. She came back to him, more cheating. And eventually she got the strength to ask for a divorce, which is what she did.
So they got a divorce and then they worked together again?
Well, she was contractually obligated to make The Lady from Shanghai, which he was directing, which is now a famous story because he treated her so horribly on set. He famously made her cut her beautiful red locks into this kind of harsh bleach blonde haircut. Really
What about
made her
a
life a
wig,
living hell.
Orson? What about a wig?
Well, I think it was part of him being the puppet master and really having fun at her expense.
Right.
But the great part is the movie's fantastic. The chemistry is palpable. You can feel the tension. You can almost feel everything created offset on screen.
Yeah.
It's such a good movie.
Yeah.
But that was their last time to be together.
Now, Rita would go on to marry 3 more times, including with Dick Haymes, the singer and actor.
Who was a loser of his own right. There's a whole story about him I won't even get into, but there's, bad guy again.
And Orson went on to marry again and had many, many girlfriends.
Many, many girlfriends.
Well, I think it's time for our Hollywood pop quiz.
Well, with all this love in the air.
Yeah, or not.
Or not. One of the most famous horrible couples ever was Ernest Borgnine and Ethel Merman, which we've actually talked about on a prior.
Yes.
They were married for 42 days. In Ethel Merman's autobiography, there's a chapter called My Marriage to Ernest Borgnine, and it's a blank page. So that tells you a lot.
That's amazing.
Well, the question is, when Ernest Borgnine met Ethel Merman, he was in the process of divorcing another high-profile actress. Who was it?
All right, we'll be back with the answer and more of Cupid's epic fails after
Epic
this.
fails.
Hey, Steve and Ann will be right back, but first another stop on the Hollywood tour. Just a few minutes ago, they were talking about Orson Welles and Rita Hayworth. Well, Operation Crossroads involved the 4th atomic bomb ever to be detonated. That was in 1946. And that bomb was decorated with a photograph of Rita Hayworth. She had just released the film Gilda that same year. Now, on the bomb itself, just above that photo, was the name Gilda. Someone stenciled it there in black letters. The idea had been a tribute to Hayworth and her bombshell status. Well, it didn't go over too well. In fact, Hayworth was furious and offended by that gesture. Her then husband, Orson Welles, said it was the angriest he had ever seen her be. She actually wanted to go to Washington to hold a press conference, but Harry Cohn at Columbia Pictures wouldn't let her. He said it would be unpatriotic. And now back to Steve and Ann from Beneath the Hollywood Sign.
Our next epic fail is Paulette Goddard and Burgess Meredith. Once again, Steve.
Who would have ever put them together?
I can't imagine them being put together.
I know, here she was, the beautiful pinup girl of Paramount Pictures, and he's the Penguin.
He's the Penguin from Batman. He's Rocky Balboa's trainer in the Rocky films. But back in the day, he was, as you call him, a stud.
He was a total stud.
No, and it wasn't necessarily his looks or his stature, but he was known for his sense of humor and his
Intellect.
intelligence.
Yes.
And you know what? There ain't nothing more attractive in a man than that, I got to tell you.
Smart is sexy.
Yep,
It
smart
is.
and funny is sexy.
It is. And I mean, he dated some of the most incredible women of the day. I mean, he dated Ingrid Bergman, Carol Landis, who we've talked about.
Yes.
Olivia de Havilland, Norma Shearer, the queen of MGM.
Wow.
I mean, he had a way with the ladies.
Yeah.
They were just charmed by him. That he was irresistible. And I think it was all because he had the silver tongue.
Yeah.
He knew how to talk to a woman, and he knew how to engage and be interesting. And I love that about him.
I do too. And it worked with Paulette Goddard. So she is a movie star, huge at the time.
Oh, she was at the top of her game when they began dating. I mean, she, of course, everyone knows that she got her start with her first husband, Charlie Chaplin, in Modern Times in 1936. She appeared in so many hit movies, The Women, The Cat and the Canary. So she is just at the apex of her career.
Right. Now, they both had been married twice before.
Yes.
Before they met each other.
Yes. Because I think she joked when they finally got together, maybe third time will be the charm for both of us.
Yes.
Well, it wasn't.
It wasn't. Well, they were friends first.
Yes.
And then it became romantic. So she begins dating Burgess in 1943.
Well, she was dating a lot of
I
people
know she
in
was dating,
1943.
including, I mentioned him earlier, Clark Gable.
Clark Gable. And I think she was also dating pretty seriously at the same time studs. I mean, good looking, the people you would think that Paulette Goddard would be dating. And then here comes...
They didn't make her laugh.
Here
so
comes
there you go.
Burgess.
So they got married pretty quickly.
They did.
And they got married at the home of David O. Selznick and his wife Irene, which...
Why does everything track back to David O. Selznick?
I know. There's something going on there.
David O. Selznick must must have been like just the vortex of Hollywood.
Yes, yes. They were living a really glamorous life. They were splitting time between LA and New York. They had a beach house.
Yes, but I think it was chaotic for them too. I think it was glamorous,
No
but kinda
structure.
crazy and chaotic,
Yeah.
kind of like they were.
Yeah, having parties with all their Hollywood friends because everybody knows everybody, and
Yes.
hanging out with John Garfield and John Huston and all kinds of people.
Yeah, Evelyn Keyes, who we
Evelyn
spoke
Keyes,
of last
yeah.
week.
Yeah. So they are married, and in October of 1944, Paulette suffered a miscarriage.
Yes, yeah.
And that probably put a strain on the marriage.
Yeah, and I think this might have been sort of the beginning of the end for them. I don't know that they ever really worked through it because they ended up spending less and less time together. He would be on the East Coast, she would be on the West Coast, she would be busy on a movie. They just drifted apart. There wasn't an inciting incident, there wasn't a fight, there wasn't an affair. They just realized, I think, after a period of time and after the miscarriage, that they just didn't have that much in common.
Okay.
And so it fizzled.
So they divorced in 49, but that quiet before the storm, right?
It was indeed, because then Meredith, he marries pretty quickly to a woman named Cara Sunston, less than a year after his Mexican divorce from Paulette Goddard.
Okay. Wow.
Which is, fine and dandy.
Yeah.
But then Paulette Goddard gets a little surprised when she finds out that Burgess Meredith is suing her for $400,000.
What? Why?
Well, I guess he claimed this was his half of their community property when they were married.
Oh.
Well, Paulette, who we all know is a firecracker, was not going to take this lying down, so she countersued.
Okay.
And then she questioned the validity of the Mexican divorce, which would put his new marriage in jeopardy.
Oh boy.
So he quickly settled out of court.
Okay. We don't know what happened there.
We don't know, but
Yeah.
it quickly went away when Paulette was saying, well, we might still be married, so you might have an illegal wedding there.
Now, both Burgess Meredith and Paulette Goddard, they both go on to new relationships that last for quite a while.
So apparently, the fourth time was the charm.
Time is the charm.
For both of them.
Yes. So Burgess and Cara are married for 46 years.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
Until his death, I think, in 1997.
And then Paulette marries, like you said, a fourth time to the novelist Eric Maria Remarque, who wrote All Quiet on the Western Front. And they were married until his death in 1970.
Yeah, so fourth time's the charm.
Fourth time is the charm. Okay, good to know. I got 3 more. All right, our last epic fail that we're going to talk about is one that I didn't know a lot about, but this was a fascinating story.
This is a doozy.
This is Shirley Temple and John Agar.
Yes.
Who knew that Shirley Temple was married to someone before Mr. Black?
I know we all know her as Shirley Temple Black, but
Right.
for a brief time, I think 5 years, she was Shirley Temple Agar.
Now, you mentioned mothers being close to some of the starlets, and I just say that as a backdrop
Ooh,
to perhaps the complications of a relationship.
This mother definitely complicates things big time.
Yes,
You know,
yes.
because we all know Shirley Temple. She was one of Hollywood's most iconic, legendary child stars.
Beloved.
Yeah. Well, she actually met her first husband, John Agar, when she was only 15 and he was 22. So let's just start there.
Yeah, let's start there. That shouldn't have happened. Now,
Yeah.
she's going to Westlake High School here in Hollywood, right?
Yes, she is. She
And-
is. And at the time, it's interesting for her career-wise because she's struggling to
Yes.
make that transition
Yes.
into adulthood. So
Right.
she had been like the darling of cinema for so many years, and now she's become a teenager. It's a really tough transition for her. So she goes to high school, as you said, at Westlake.
Right, right. And Agar's sister is a schoolmate
Yes.
of Shirley Temple's, and Shirley has a party at, once again, David O. Selznick's house to go to, and she needs an escort. Am I
Well,
getting that right?
And I've heard a couple of variations of
Okay.
this story because I went and read parts of Shirley Temple's biography,
Autobiography.
and John Agar actually has a biography that he dictated to an author.
wow.
And they met. I think the party is true, but they initially met because next door to Shirley Temple and her very overprotective parents, Gertrude and George Temple, lived an incredible character actress named Zazu Pitts.
Oh, Zazu Pitts.
Yes, who we all know and
Yes.
love. And John Agar and his family were family friends with the Pitts.
So that's how she first
So
met
John
him.
comes over to visit Zazu Pitts, and he meets Shirley for the first time. Then I keep going back to the fact that she was 15 and he was 22. But
I know.
there was an attraction, and I think a romance started blooming from there.
Okay.
And I think their first date might have been this party. at
This
David
party at
Selznick's.
Selznick's. That makes sense.
Yeah.
So they start dating. And
Well, I just want to interject this because I
please.
find this fascinating. And I read this in Shirley Temple's biography. She even admits that when she was a student at Westlake School for Girls, she became obsessed with being the first girl in her class to be engaged.
I read that too.
Yeah.
I read that too.
So I think she had a mission.
She did.
And I think also she wanted to prove to her parents and maybe to the world as a whole that she wasn't a child anymore. She
Right.
was an adult, and she was going to prove it, and she was going to get herself married.
I so understand that. I mean, she I think has been described in some of the research I was looking at as this strong-willed, chain-smoking teenager.
Yeah.
But it makes sense because her whole life was about the good ship
Being
Lollipop.
the good girl.
And I want to prove to you that I have more to give than that.
On those same lines, when John Agar finally proposes to her, they're out parking. I love that. And when he proposes
Does
to her,
anybody do that
I
anymore?
know, does anybody park without getting killed? But when he proposes to her, she's wearing a promise ring from another guy.
Oh, boy.
As he proposes to her. So
Wow.
Shirley was, hedging her bets.
Yes, she was.
But she did say in her biography that the first guy's ring was just a mere granite or stone, whereas John gave her a diamond, so she decided to go with the diamond.
Go with the diamond. Go with diamond. So they get married September 19th, 1945. That's
Yes.
what I had.
Her mother wanted her to wait till she was 18.
Right.
But impetuous kids, they couldn't. So she waited till she was 17.
They couldn't. Yeah.
Well, the funny things about their wedding, too, I'll just interject this a little bit, was John and Shirley, wanted a very simple, intimate wedding. But then David O. Selznick found out about it, and he turned it into a spectacular, over-the-top PR event with photographers and
because
reporters.
it's Shirley
and,
Temple
yeah.
getting married.
Yes.
That would have been big news.
Of course, he wasn't going to miss out on an opportunity, I'm sure.
Right. They do end up having a child, Linda Susan,
Yes.
in 48. But during this time,
Well,
there's a lot happening.
There's a lot going on that I think that doomed this marriage. And the first thing I think that happened was that John Agar got out of the Navy.
Yeah.
He had no real career ambition whatsoever. He had no
Right.
career plan. It really made him angry. He was being called Mr. Shirley Temple.
You know what? Too bad.
Yeah, exactly. And so to make matters worse, Mama and Papa Temple sort of strong-armed them into moving back home with them. But they don't live in the main house. Oh, this is great. They live in Shirley Temple's playhouse.
No, they do
Yes,
not.
that she played in as a child, but fortunately they had converted it into at least a livable guest house.
Right.
But they lived in Shirley Temple's playhouse, 50 yards from the
Mommy
watchful
and Daddy.
eyes of Mommy and Daddy.
Well,
Which could not have been easy for John
no,
Agar.
That would have been really difficult. I will say it's pretty slick what ends up happening, though, with David O. Selznick giving him
Yes.
a contract, a 5-year contract, including acting lessons.
Yes. And it's funny because Selznick met Agar at the wedding and he had Shirley Temple under contract. So Shirley Temple in her biography says this was all done without her knowledge, without her consent, and behind her back. But Selznick approached Agar and said, "What are you going to do with yourself?" And he said, "I don't really know." And Selznick says, "Have you ever thought about film acting?" He goes, "No, not really." He goes, do you want to take a screen test?" And Agar takes a screen test. Obviously, Selznick liked what he saw because he put him under contract.
Because he put him under contract.
It made Shirley furious.
Well,
because she was, dealing with her own crumbling career.
It makes me furious.
I know, but he was making $150 a week, which I think at that point any employment would have been a good thing for the marriage.
And he's in some pretty interesting films. I mean, Fort Apache.
Well, that was his screen debut. Can you imagine?
Yes.
Like you start your career
with John Wayne.
With John Wayne and
in a
John
Ford.
Yes. Yeah, and also your love interest is Shirley Temple.
Shirley Temple.
Which I think that was so fortuitous, that was his film debut. I mean, he really started his career with a bang. And also John Wayne took a liking to Agar. and really took him under his wing and helped shepherd his career. Agar went on to appear, I think, 5 more John Wayne movies, like She Wore a Yellow Ribbon and The Sands of Iwo Jima. But he also introduced them to his hard-living, hard-drinking fraternity of men, which included John Ford and Ward Bond and Victor McLaglen. So this is what starts things a little rocky.
Right. I mean, Agar, one of the things I read about him, he's quoted as saying he blames John Wayne for introducing him to alcohol and tobacco. And I'm like, okay, yeah, but you had a choice there. So.
Well, he did. And it's funny because in the biography I read of him, he blames the pressure of Mr. and Mrs. Temple for his drinking.
Okay.
He never really takes ownership for his drinking, which
that's interesting.
Not so cool.
So this drinking brings out, in one of the things I saw in her autobiography, this unpredictable temper that the alcohol would induce, and it exploded oftentimes into violence.
It did, and he was arrested a couple of times for drunk driving, which, just did not help matters. And, even with trying to raise a daughter together, it did not help the marriage. So they decided, I think maybe a last-ditch effort, that maybe they should work together again. So they make a second movie together.
Okay.
Which was called Adventure in Baltimore.
Okay.
Anybody?
No,
Ever heard of it?
Haven't seen it. No.
Well, it was this lackluster drama about the suffrage movement with Robert Young starring in it. And it was a big bomb. It did nothing for Shirley's career. In fact, I think she made 2 more films and then retired. She was done.
Okay.
And then for Agar, his career started off strong, but then eventually his career slid into B-rate movies, usually war pictures or science fiction movies like Tarantula in 1955 and The Mole People in 1956. So it's just a mess between them.
Yeah. So after 4 years of marriage, Temple files for divorce.
Yes.
She accuses Agar of mental cruelty, and she was actually granted sole custody of their daughter.
Yes, she was. And then while they're waiting for their divorce to become final, which it took a year, she takes a trip to Hawaii and she meets Charles Black, this very wealthy businessman. So she falls in love. And so she is just watching the clock, waiting for that divorce to become final so she can marry Charles Black.
Okay.
After the divorce was finally final, I think it was 12 days later, she marries Black. The next year, Agar marries a model named Loretta Combs in Las Vegas.
Okay.
But apparently he was too drunk to do the marriage the first time, so the minister made him wait and sober up to come back and get married. But then the kind of tragic part to me is that once Shirley Temple married Charles Black, she asked John Agar to let Charles Black adopt their daughter, Susan, take his name, which, surprisingly, Agar agreed to.
Yeah.
And I think at the time he was probably a mess. I think he was a raging alcoholic and had financial problems. And he says in his biography, his autobiography, that he just didn't have money to fight Shirley Temple.
Yeah.
And so he just basically gave his daughter away.
Well, Shirley Temple Black was married to Charles Black for 55 years.
Nice. And actually, John Agar did eventually clean himself up and got sober, and he remained married to Combs for 49 years.
You know what? That was second time's the charm. All right. Well, this has been a really interesting subject matter for Valentine's month.
So go kiss your partner. My God.
Yeah. I think it's time for the answer to our Hollywood pop quiz.
Yes. And the question involved Ernest Borgnine and Ethel Merman, one of the most mismatched couples ever. And the question was, who was Ernest Borgnine married to just before he married Ethel Merman?
All right. Who was it?
It was the wonderful Mexican actress Katie Jurado, who we all know from High Noon.
Yes.
She played Gary Cooper's scorned lover, who has no time for that Quaker girl, Grace Kelly.
And they weren't married for...
They weren't married very long.
Yeah.
So I think Ernest ended up being married 5 times until he finally met Tova, his wife, who was married to for decades.
Okay. All right. Well, thanks so much for listening, everyone. If you would follow us on social media, we would love that. We'll give you previews of what's happening in the future on the podcast. You can follow us with the handle @FromBeneathTheHollywoodSign on Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube.
Or if you have any questions or comments or great stories about Ernest Borgnine, we would love to hear from you. So please email us at info@FromBeneathTheHollywoodSign.com.
That's this week's view.
From Beneath the Hollywood Sign.
You've been listening to From Beneath the Hollywood Sign with Steve Cubine and Nan McNamara, the podcast that celebrates amazing stories of Tinseltown from its golden era. Join us next week for another episode and learn something else about Hollywood you probably never knew. Take a moment and give us a 5-star rating and a positive review. And tell your friends about us too. It'll help grow the podcast. Visit Steve's website at FromBeneathTheHollywoodSign.com. The executive producers are Steve Cubine and Nan McNamara. Executive producer and post-production supervisor Lindsay Schnebley. This podcast is part of the Airwave Media Podcast Network. Visit airwavemedia.com to listen and subscribe to their other fine shows like The Box of Oddities and The Shallow End with Schnebley and Toth. Copyright 2024, all rights reserved. That's a wrap.